The old courthouse stood tall in the center of town, its stone pillars weathered but dignified, a reminder of countless trials and the lives they had shaped. On that particular morning, its wooden doors creaked as waves of townspeople streamed inside, eager to witness what promised to be an unusual case. The benches filled quickly, the air heavy with whispers, nervous coughs, and the shuffle of restless feet. Everyone wanted to see for themselves whether justice would favor the man who claimed he was bitten, or the loyal police dog accused of being dangerous. The tension inside was palpable. The polished oak walls reflected the faces of townsfolk leaning forward, straining to hear every word. In the front row sat a handful of local reporters, notepads balanced on their knees, pens ready to capture the drama. On one side of the room, the prosecution prepared to defend the reputation of a decorated canine, a dog who had served the community faithfully for years. On the other side, the defense argued he had turned violent, harming an innocent man during an arrest gone wrong. The stakes were high not just for the officer, but for the dog whose future now hung in balance. Officer Daniels sat stiffly in his chair, his uniform pressed, his expression controlled, yet betraying a quiet storm underneath. To him, the dog wasn't just a partner, but family. Together they had chased criminals, tracked missing children, and stood guard through long nights of uncertainty. The thought of his partner being branded violent and possibly removed from service felt unbearable. His hand rested unconsciously on the wooden table before him, tapping faintly, betraying his unease. The accused sat outside the courtroom doors, unable to enter, but close enough to be felt. Max, the German shepherd, waited patiently with another handler, his dark eyes steady, his ears perked at every distant sound. Loyal as ever, he seemed unaware of the storm raging inside over his fate. The judge entered, robes flowing, and the room rose respectfully. His stern gaze scanned the chamber, silencing the last murmurs before he took his seat. Papers rustled as the clerk began calling the case, the names echoing off the high ceilings. Case number 482, the clerk announced. State versus Officer Daniels' K-9 partner. Max, accused of use of excessive force. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Though everyone knew the case, hearing it spoken aloud gave it a heavier weight. A police dog on trial was rare, almost unheard of, and people were drawn to the oddity as much as the controversy. The defense wasted no time. A tall man in a dark suit rose, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence. Ladies and gentlemen, this dog is not the loyal hero you've been led to believe. On the night of the arrest, Max attacked an innocent man, leaving him injured. We demand accountability. If this dog cannot be controlled, then it has no place serving this community. The jury shifted in their seats, some frowning, others skeptical. The defense attorney's words rang loudly, but they seemed rehearsed, heavy with drama rather than sincerity. Still, the image of an out-of-control dog stuck uneasily in the air. The prosecutor, a woman with calm authority, stood next. Max is not only trained but highly decorated, she countered firmly. He has saved lives, located missing persons, and protected officers during dangerous situations. On the night in question, he acted under command, not aggression. The so-called victim resisted arrest and endangered others. Max did what he was trained to do: help. Her words steadied the room, restoring some balance, but uncertainty lingered. The jury would need more than polished speeches. They would need truth, something undeniable. Witnesses came forward one by one. A neighbor described hearing barking and shouting that night, though admitted they couldn't see clearly. Another witness claimed the dog lunged, though under cross-examination, their memory faltered. Confusion began to weave its way into the proceedings, leaving the jury unsure what to believe. As the morning wore on, tension thickened like fog. Officer Daniels sat motionless, though his eyes never left the jury, silently pleading for them to see the truth. He knew Max had done nothing wrong, but words alone rarely swayed hearts. Just as the prosecution prepared to call their next witness, the heavy doors of the courtroom creaked open. Heads turned. A woman entered quietly, holding the tiny hand of a child who clutched a worn stuffed bunny. Gasps echoed through the chamber. What was a 3-year-old doing here? The mother walked nervously down the aisle, her daughter skipping slightly to keep pace. The little girl's shoes tapped lightly against the polished floor, each step a surprising intrusion into the seriousness of the courtroom. The judge raised his eyebrows, clearly puzzled. "And who might this be?" he asked, his tone stern but not unkind. The mother cleared her throat, her voice trembling but steady enough. "Your Honor, my daughter was there that night. She saw what happened. She has something important to say." The defense attorney scoffed, shaking his head. "Surely we aren't allowing testimony from a toddler. This is a courtroom, not a nursery." Laughter rippled faintly among a few spectators, but it died quickly under the judge's glare. The judge tapped his gavel once, silencing the room. His gaze softened slightly as he looked at the child, who now stood blinking curiously at the grand chamber around her. Her innocence was disarming in a place so often dominated by fear, anger, and judgment. After a pause, the judge nodded. "Very well. Let the child speak." The courtroom grew still. Every sound seemed magnified: the creak of benches, the scribble of a reporter's pen, the faint cough of a juror. Even Officer Daniels, who had remained stoic all morning, felt his chest tighten. He had no idea what the child might say, but a strange sense of hope flickered in him for the first time that day. The little girl was lifted onto the witness chair, her feet dangling far above the ground. She clutched her stuffed bunny tightly, its fur warm from countless nights of comfort. The bailiff swore her in as gently as possible, the ritual feeling both absurd and profound. "Do you promise to tell the truth?" he asked softly. The girl nodded, her pigtails bobbing with the motion. The prosecutor approached slowly, crouching to meet her eye level. "Sweetheart," she said kindly, "can you tell us what you remember about the dog that night?" The room leaned forward, every breath held. The girl blinked once, then twice, her eyes wide with both innocence and memory. Her lips parted, and in the quietest of voices, she said a single word. "Doggy." Laughter, light but genuine, rippled through the crowd. The defense rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath. But the judge remained silent, watching carefully. The prosecutor smiled softly. "Yes, that's right. The dog. Can you tell us what the dog did?" The girl squeezed her stuffed bunny tighter, her tiny brow furrowing as she searched for words. Then, as clear as a bell, she whispered the 2 words that would change everything. "Doggy helped." The courtroom froze. For a moment, no one moved. The words hung in the air like a strike of thunder, cutting through arguments, doubts, and rehearsed speeches. They came not from a lawyer, not from a witness with biases, but from the pure honesty of a child who had no reason to lie. Officer Daniels felt his throat tighten, his eyes stinging with emotion. Across the aisle, the defense attorney's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. The jury shifted, their faces softening. 2 words. That was all it took. And in that instant, the trial was no longer the same. The morning sun spilled across the quiet streets of the small town, glinting off windows and glimmering across the courthouse steps. For most townspeople, it was an ordinary day, but inside the courthouse, the air was electric with anticipation. News crews had arrived hours earlier, cameras and microphones set up in corners, their lenses tracking every movement. Reporters whispered into microphones, capturing every detail of the crowd gathering in the public gallery. At the center of it all was a tiny figure, barely 3 years old, holding tightly onto her mother's hand. Her mother, A woman in her late 20s, with anxious eyes softened by pride, bent low to speak to her daughter. "Remember, sweetheart," she whispered, "just tell the truth. Be brave, like Max." The girl's small hand tightened around her stuffed bunny, its fur worn and matted from constant companionship. She nodded, her wide eyes darting nervously around the grand courtroom, taking in the tall judge, the dark wooden benches, the vast chandelier above, and the people sitting in rows of chairs, strangers who had gathered to witness a trial no toddler should ever face. Max, Officer Daniel's police dog, waited just outside the courtroom. The massive German shepherd was calm but alert, tail swishing lightly against the floor, ears twitching at every sound. Daniels crouched down to ruffle Max's head. "Stay sharp, buddy," he whispered. "Today, it's more than just work. Today, we do what's right." Max barked softly in response, a low, measured sound that seemed to promise loyalty and courage. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Journalists whispered, taking notes feverishly, while spectators shifted nervously in their seats. The defendant sat at the defense table, slouched, his eyes scanning the room with a mix of arrogance and unease. His lawyer flipped through papers, muttering instructions under his breath. Across the aisle, the prosecutor straightened his tie, projecting calm and confidence, ready to navigate the storm that was about to unfold. The judge entered, and the room fell silent instantly. His robes swept across the floor, the echo reverberating against the high ceilings. He nodded at the attorneys and the court officers, then at the gallery. "We are here for the continuation of the trial in the matter of the state versus Jonathan Reed. Today, we will hear critical testimony. The court expects decorum at all times." The bailiff led the tiny witness to the stand. The toddler's mother followed closely, kneeling beside her daughter to adjust the chair and whisper words of encouragement. The girl climbed into the witness seat with a careful precision that belied her age. She clutched her bunny, her small legs dangling above the polished wood floor. The gallery held its breath. Reporters clicked pens and cameras softly whirred, capturing the image of the child who would deliver testimony that could change the outcome of the trial. The defense attorney smirked, leaning back in his chair. "A child," he muttered under his breath. "This is ridiculous. She has no bearing on the facts." The prosecutor, crouched to meet the toddler's eye level, smiled warmly. "Hello there," he said gently. "Can you tell us your name?" The child's voice was small but clear. "Emma," she said softly, glancing at her mother. "And how old are you, Emma?" the prosecutor asked. "3, she answered proudly. The courtroom murmured. 3 years old. A tiny human, barely old enough to form complete sentences, about to provide testimony in a case involving threat, fear, and protection. The prosecutor took a gentle breath. "Emma, do you remember the night something scary happened?" Her brow furrowed slightly. She hugged her bunny closer, then nodded. "Yes. Can you tell us what you saw?" Emma hesitated. Her small lips pursed. She glanced at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. The girl leaned forward slightly, whispering in a voice that carried just enough for the microphone to pick up. "Doggy helped." The courtroom reacted instantly. Some spectators gasped softly. Jurors exchanged glances. Uncertainty and curiosity mirrored on their faces. Officer Daniels felt a lump in his throat. He looked at Max, whose ears twitched in recognition, as if understanding the weight of the child's words. The defense attorney rose abruptly. "Objection," he barked, his voice echoing through the chamber. "The child is too young. Her statements are unreliable. She cannot provide testimony that holds any weight." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Objection noted. However, the testimony is admissible. Counsel, proceed carefully." The prosecutor nodded, crouching lower so Emma could see him clearly. "Emma," he said softly. "Can you tell us what the doggy did to help you?" The child's eyes grew wide, and her small hand pointed in the direction of the doors, beyond which Max waited. "Pulled me," she whispered. The words, simple and few, reverberated like a hammer in the silent courtroom. The jurors sat straighter. The spectators leaned forward. The defendant's face tightened with unease, while his attorney scribbled frantic notes, searching for a weakness that did not exist. "Pulled you?" the prosecutor asked gently. "Pulled you away from what?" Emma's hand shook slightly as she pointed toward the defense table. The man was scary. "Dog pulled me." The gallery fell silent. Even the judge's usually impassive face revealed a flicker of recognition, the gravity of the words sinking in. A child's memory, untainted and raw, had just spoken a truth that no amount of argument could easily undo. The prosecutor allowed a pause, letting Emma's words resonate in the room. "Was anyone hurt?" "No," she said simply. "Doggy saved me?" Officer Daniels felt tears prick his eyes. Max, still outside the courtroom, seemed to respond with a gentle, low bark, as if acknowledging the gravity of the moment. Emma's mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "You're so brave, baby." "So very brave." The defense attorney tried once more, voice forced. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. A toddler's account cannot outweigh the procedural and factual evidence." The judge's gavel came down lightly. "Overruled. The jury will weigh the testimony as they see fit," the prosecutor smiled. "Thank you, Emma. That is all for now. You may step down." Emma's mother lifted her into her arms. The girl clutched her bunny, gazing back at the courtroom with wide, innocent eyes. Outside, Max waited patiently, tail thumping lightly, ready to continue his silent guardianship. As Emma left the stand, the courtroom buzzed quietly with whispers. The jury exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, others scribbling notes furiously. The seed of truth had been planted, small yet impossibly potent. The stage was set. The child's testimony, her 2 words, "Doggy helped," had shifted the balance of the trial. The defense would have to work harder than ever, and the prosecution's confidence grew with every heartbeat. This moment, quiet and fleeting, would echo through the courtroom long after the session ended. It was the day a toddler and a dog had irrevocably altered the course of justice. And for the townspeople, the jurors, and the officers present, it was the beginning of a story they would tell for years. A story of courage, loyalty, and the power of the smallest voice to make the largest impact. The courthouse loomed over the small town like a monument of judgment, its stone steps worn smooth by generations of uncertain feet. On that crisp morning, the air buzzed with a strange energy. People poured through its heavy wooden doors, eager to see the spectacle that had gripped the community for weeks. Inside, polished oak benches filled quickly, the chatter of neighbors colliding with the clatter of heels across the marble floor. At the heart of the day's drama was no ordinary case. A decorated police dog named Max stood accused of biting an innocent man. That accusation alone had been enough to spark outrage, sympathy, and fierce debate. Was Max a hero pushed into a difficult moment, or a dangerous animal unfit for duty? The jury would decide, but the town had already chosen sides. Officer Daniels sat at the front, uniform crisp, posture rigid, but the truth was written across his face. Behind the calm exterior lived a man barely holding together. Max wasn't just his partner, he was his brother, his shadow, his lifeline in the most dangerous corners of their work. To imagine Max stripped of his badge, or worse, destroyed, was a weight too heavy to bear. Daniel's hand tapped unconsciously against the wooden table, a rhythm betraying his nerves. Max himself waited just outside the courtroom, barred from entering yet close enough to sense the tension. The German shepherd sat obediently beside another handler, His ears perked, eyes sharp. He looked every bit the disciplined partner Daniels knew him to be, unaware that his very future was being debated only feet away. The judge entered, robes flowing, his stern presence silencing the restless murmurs. Everyone rose, then sat in tense unison as the clerk's voice echoed. Case number 482. The State versus Officer Daniels' K-9 partner, Max. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Though the details were well known, hearing it spoken aloud gave the matter a solemn weight. A police dog on trial, it felt absurd, yet here they all were. The defense attorney, a tall man in a sleek gray suit, stood with deliberate precision. His voice sliced through the silence. Ladies and gentlemen, this dog is not the loyal hero the department paints him to be. On the night in question, Max attacked an innocent citizen, leaving him injured and traumatized. If this community values safety, it must acknowledge that an unpredictable animal cannot be trusted to wear a badge. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably. The defense had chosen sharp, simple words. Attacked, injured, traumatized. They clung like burrs in the air, hard to shake. The prosecutor rose with calm authority, her voice steady, deliberate. Max is not just a dog. He is a trained officer with a record of bravery that outshines many humans in uniform. He has located missing children, defended his handler in life-threatening moments, and saved countless lives. On that night, Max did exactly what he was trained to do: restrain a dangerous suspect who resisted arrest. He acted not in violence, but in service. Her words steadied the room, though uncertainty lingered. The jury wanted facts, not rhetoric. They needed to see the truth through the haze of arguments. One by one, witnesses took the stand. A neighbor swore they heard barking and shouts, but admitted they saw little. Another claimed Max lunged without reason, though their recollection wavered under cross-examination. Each testimony added threads of confusion, weaving a fabric that was thin in places, strong in others. Officer Daniels sat motionless, his jaw clenched. He wanted to stand up and shout that Max would never harm without cause, that his dog had saved him more times than he could count. But he knew better than to speak out of turn. All he could do was trust that truth would find a way through. Then the courtroom doors creaked open. Heads turned as a young woman entered, guiding a tiny child by the hand. The girl couldn't have been older than 3, her pigtails bouncing, her other hand clutching a worn stuffed bunny. Gasps and whispers spread like wildfire. What was a toddler doing here? The mother led her carefully down the aisle. The child's shoes tapped lightly against the polished floor, their rhythm almost mocking the heavy seriousness of the room. She looked around curiously, her wide eyes absorbing the stern faces, the tall benches, the strange formality of it all. The judge's brows furrowed. And who might this be? His tone was sharp, though not cruel. The mother's voice trembled, but her resolve did not. Your Honor, this is my daughter. She was there that night. She saw what happened. She has something important to share. The defense attorney scoffed, throwing his hands up. Surely we cannot waste this court's time with the babbling of a toddler. This is a trial, not daycare. A few spectators chuckled nervously. The judge silenced them with a single glare, his gavel striking once. He studied the little girl for a long moment, noting her innocence, her calm. Sometimes truth comes from unexpected places, he finally said. Very well. Let her speak. The courtroom fell into an unnatural stillness. Every cough, every shuffle seemed amplified. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. Jurors stared, torn between skepticism and curiosity. Even Officer Daniels, who had held himself so tightly all morning, felt his heart lurch. He had no idea what the child might say, but for the first time that day, a flicker of hope stirred within him. The little girl was lifted onto the witness chair, her feet dangling far above the ground. She clutched her stuffed bunny tighter, its fabric worn thin from years of comfort. The bailiff swore her in with exaggerated gentleness, the ritual almost comical but deeply moving. The prosecutor approached carefully, kneeling so her eyes were level with the child's. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "do you remember the dog?" The girl blinked, then nodded. Her lips parted, and in a voice so small it was nearly a whisper, she said a single word. "Doggy." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, this time warm and genuine. The defense attorney smirked, confident her testimony would amount to nothing more than childish nonsense. But the judge leaned forward, eyes steady. The prosecutor smiled. "Yes, the dog. Can you tell us what the dog did?" The girl tightened her grip on the bunny, her tiny brow furrowed as though she were searching carefully for the right memory. She looked toward the doors, where Max waited patiently with his handler. Then, with surprising clarity, she spoke again. "Doggy helped." The words landed like thunder. The room froze. The reporters' pens paused mid-stroke. The jury sat wide-eyed, breathless. The mother covered her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. 2 words. That was all. But in those words lived a purity no adult could replicate, no lawyer could manufacture. It was truth stripped bare, delivered with the innocence of someone too young to scheme, too young to lie. Officer Daniels felt his throat tighten, his chest swell with relief. His partner's honor, his very life, might have just been saved by the smallest voice in the room. The defense attorney's smirk faltered. For the first time that day, he looked unsure. The judge leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable. But deep in his eyes flickered something that hadn't been there before. Belief. And so, with 2 simple words from a 3-year-old girl, the trial shifted. Everything that came next would be colored by the innocence of her testimony. The courtroom would never be the same again. The prosecutor stayed crouched, his expression gentle but serious, as if speaking to the child was the most important moment of the entire trial. The room was utterly still, every person leaning forward in anticipation. The little girl fidgeted with her stuffed bunny, running her fingers over its worn ear, her eyes darting between the lawyer and the massive wooden doors at the back of the courtroom where Max waited patiently. She was small, too small for such a heavy place, and yet her presence seemed to fill it. Even the ceiling fans that whirred above seemed to quiet as if listening. "Can you tell us what you saw that night?" The prosecutor asked again, voice soft, paced like a lullaby. The girl hesitated. Her lips pursed, then parted, as though forming words was more difficult than lifting a stone. At last she nodded slowly. "Doggy," she whispered, her voice carrying just far enough for the microphone to catch. The courtroom chuckled lightly. Jurors smiled, and even the judge's lips twitched at the innocence of it. The defense attorney leaned back in his chair, smirking smugly as if to say, "See? This is ridiculous." To him, it was nothing more than a child's babble, irrelevant to the weight of the law. But the prosecutor knew better. He leaned forward a little closer, lowering his voice further, careful not to intimidate her. "Yes, the doggy. You saw him. Can you tell us what the doggy did?" The girl squeezed her bunny tighter, her tiny fingers pressing so hard that its stuffing bunched beneath the fabric. Her brow furrowed in concentration. She glanced at her mother, who gave her an encouraging nod, then looked back at the lawyer. Her small voice, though trembling, came out clear enough to silence every skeptic in the room. "Doggy helped." The words rang out, soft yet powerful, striking the courtroom with the force of a hammer. The jurors stiffened. The spectators' murmurs cut off mid-breath. Even Officer Daniels, who had kept himself contained all morning, felt his eyes sting, his throat tightening. For the first time that day, The defense attorney's smirk slipped. He straightened in his chair, narrowing his eyes at the girl, trying to gauge whether what he had just heard carried any weight. Helped? The prosecutor repeated, as though carefully unwrapping the word. Sweetheart, can you tell us how the doggy helped? The child shifted in her chair. Her legs swung back and forth, not touching the ground. She tilted her head to the side, eyes growing brighter as she pieced together her memory. She raised one tiny hand, clumsy yet deliberate, and mimicked a pulling motion. Pulled me, she said with effort, her voice louder now, finding its confidence. Pulled me back. The room leaned in. The girl's words were like puzzle pieces falling neatly into place. Her mother dabbed her eyes, nodding quietly, whispering almost to herself. That's right, baby. That's what happened. The prosecutor gently asked, He pulled you back from what? The girl pointed toward the far wall, her hand quivering, as if the memory itself frightened her. The man, she said simply. The man was bad. He was yelling loud. Dog pulled me. Saved me. The impact was immediate. Jurors exchanged glances, their earlier doubt melting into something else, something that looked remarkably like belief. Reporters scribbled furiously, pens scratching like thunder against their notepads. The crowd in the gallery shifted uneasily, whispering into cupped hands. The defense attorney finally snapped to life, springing to his feet. Objection. He barked, his voice sharp. This is outrageous. She's a toddler. Her memory is unreliable. This is hearsay imagination, nothing more than a child parroting what her mother told her. But the judge didn't look convinced. He leaned forward, fingers steepled, his sharp gaze fixed on the little girl. He had seen countless witnesses in his years, on the benchmen and women who twisted truths, rehearsed lies, and danced around questions. But what he saw now was something rare, innocence unshaped by agenda. The girl's testimony wasn't elaborate. It wasn't exaggerated. It was pure. Overruled, the judge said firmly, his gavel striking once. Let her continue. The defense attorney sat back down hard, his face flushed with frustration. The prosecutor smiled kindly at the girl. You said the doggy saved you. Can you show us what he did? The child thought for a moment, then set her stuffed bunny on the table. With her tiny hands, she grabbed its arms and gave a small tug, pulling it backward. Like this, she explained proudly, demonstrating the motion. Doggy pulled me. Didn't bite me. Didn't bite Mommy. Only helped. It was a child's reenactment. Simple and imperfect, yet it spoke louder than any polished testimony given that day. The jurors' faces softened further, one even covering his mouth in awe. Officer Daniels bowed his head, overcome by gratitude. He hadn't dared hope that a 3-year-old could carry such weight. Yet here she was, telling the truth in the only way she knew how. The prosecutor nodded solemnly. Thank you. You've been very brave today. He turned back toward the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. The courtroom buzzed faintly as the judge gestured to the defense attorney. Your witness. The defense lawyer rose slowly, smoothing his tie. He walked toward the child, careful but calculating, his tone shifting to one of false sweetness. Hello, little one, he began. Do you know the difference between truth and pretend? The girl blinked at him, confused. Pretend is like my cartoons, she said finally. But Doggy is real. Snickers echoed in the gallery, quickly stifled. The defense lawyer pressed on. Do you sometimes make up stories when you play? The girl nodded eagerly. I play princess. Doggy plays knight. She giggled at the thought, oblivious to his trap. The lawyer smiled thinly. So sometimes you pretend things about the dog? But before he could press further, the child grew serious. Her face fell into a frown, no one expected from someone so small. She shook her head. No, Doggy saved me. Not pretend. The jury visibly reacted. Whatever the defense lawyer had hoped to accomplish had backfired. He tried one last time, his tone sharper. And your mommy told you to say that, didn't she? The girl looked genuinely baffled and pointed at her mother. Mommy says be nice. But I saw it. Doggy helped. The defense attorney faltered, words drying on his tongue. He turned to the judge, muttering, "No further questions," before retreating, defeated. The child smiled then, swinging her legs once more, her courage spent, but her truth delivered. She reached for her mother, who rushed forward to scoop her up. The crowd erupted into hushed whispers, the weight of her words hanging like a storm cloud ready to break. And in that moment, as the little girl buried her face against her mother's shoulder, the trial shifted irreversibly. The truth, spoken by the tiniest voice in the room, had pierced through every argument, every objection, every doubt. The words were simple. Just two, but they were enough. Doggy helped. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Doggy helped. The courtroom had fallen into an unnatural stillness. Jurors sat frozen, their pens motionless above notepads. Reporters leaned so far forward that their chairs creaked. Officer Daniels gripped the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles whitened. The child's voice was still echoing in every ear, but not everyone was moved. The defense attorney leapt to his feet as if burned. His chair scraped loudly across the wooden floor, the sound sharp enough to make the child flinch. "Objection!" He barked, his voice cracking with indignation. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. She is 3 years old. 3. She cannot possibly be considered a reliable witness. Her testimony is nothing more than childish fantasy. This court cannot allow justice to rest on the babbling of a toddler clutching a stuffed toy." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Some spectators nodded at his logic, but most glared at him with thinly veiled disgust. To dismiss the child so harshly felt cruel, even in a place where cruelty was often masked as legal rigor. The judge raised a hand, his gavel hovering in warning. "Order in the court," he commanded. The murmur subsided. His eyes fixed sharply on the defense attorney. "Your objection is noted. However, the court will allow the child to continue. This testimony, while unusual, is admissible. The weight it carries will be for the jury to decide." The gavel came down once, firm and decisive. The defense attorney's jaw tightened, his cheeks flushing red. He muttered under his breath and sank back into his seat, his smirk replaced by a shadow of unease. The little girl, still perched on the oversized witness chair, clutched her stuffed bunny tighter. Her wide eyes darted to her mother for reassurance. The mother smiled through tears, mouthing silently, "You're doing great." The prosecutor stepped forward again, his movements slow, deliberate, as though approaching a fragile glass figure. He crouched so that his eyes were level with hers. "You're doing wonderfully," he said gently. "Can you tell us more about how the doggy helped?" The girl swung her feet nervously, her small shoes bumping the wooden chair leg with a rhythmic thump. She lifted one tiny hand and tugged her bunny backward, mimicking the motion again. "Pulled me," she said softly. Then, after a pause, she added, "Pulled me away from the bad man." The gallery gasped. The words came with a clarity no adult could have faked. She hadn't been coached to speak in legal terms. She hadn't been rehearsed to frame events. She simply spoke the memory in the language she knew. The prosecutor leaned closer. "The bad man? Can you tell us what the bad man was doing?" The child frowned, her face scrunching as she remembered. Her voice was a whisper at first, but it grew steadier as she spoke. "He was yelling, loud. He was scary. Mommy said, 'Stay close,' but the man came near. I was scared." Her eyes filled with the memory of fear, and her grip on the bunny tightened until its head bent sideways. Then Doggy pulled me back. He barked. He stopped the man. A heavy silence blanketed the room. Jurors glanced at one another, their earlier doubt dissolving under the weight of such simple, unvarnished truth. The defense attorney slammed his palm on the table. "This is absurd," he shouted. "She doesn't know what she saw. Children are easily confused. She could be describing anything. She could be repeating her mother's words." The judge's eyes cut toward him, sharp as a blade. "Enough," he snapped. "The jury will consider what they hear. Do not interrupt again." The defense attorney fell silent, though his pen now tapped furiously against his notepad, the rhythm betraying his rising panic. The prosecutor turned back to the child. "Did the doggy hurt you?" She shook her head so vigorously her pigtails swung. "No, Doggy never hurt me. Doggy saved me." She paused, then added with a certainty only a child could muster, "Doggy is my friend." A ripple of emotion moved through the courtroom. Some spectators wiped tears. One juror discreetly dabbed his eyes. Even the judge, usually carved from stone, shifted in his chair, his features softening ever so slightly. The defense attorney rose again, though this time his tone was quieter, almost pleading. "Your Honor, surely you see how this manipulates the jury. She is adorable, yes, but adorable is not admissible. We cannot base justice on sentiment." The judge's gavel came down again, louder this time. "Counselor, sit down." The courtroom obeyed the command of silence once more. The prosecutor smiled warmly at the little girl. "You've been very brave. Just one more question. Why do you think the doggy helped?" The child tilted her head, considering. Her answer was simple, unshaken, pure. "Because he's good." And with that, the truth stood taller than any objection could ever reach. The prosecutor turned back toward the jury, his expression calm but triumphant. "No further questions, Your Honor." The judge looked toward the defense table. "Your witness." The defense attorney rose reluctantly, smoothing his suit as if preparing for battle. He knew he could not win. He approached the stand slowly, his smile forced, his voice syrupy. "Hello there," he said. "Do you like to tell stories?" The girl shrugged. "Sometimes. I play princess." He chuckled hollowly. "Yes, of course. And sometimes, when you play princess, you make things up. Pretend, like a fairy tale?" The girl nodded, her smile returning briefly. "Yes, fairy tale." The lawyer leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "So maybe this story about the doggy is pretend too. Maybe it's just like one of your fairy tales?" But the girl's face hardened. Her tiny voice sharpened with conviction. "No, not fairy tale. Real. Doggy helped me. I was scared. He pulled me back." The defense attorney faltered. He tried again, desperate. "Your mommy told you to say that, didn't she?" The girl's brow furrowed. "Mommy says be nice. Mommy didn't say doggy helped." "I saw it." The courtroom erupted into murmurs again. The defense attorney froze, realizing his line of questioning had collapsed. He muttered something inaudible and backed away from the stand, defeated. The judge nodded toward the little girl. "You may step down." Her mother rushed forward, lifting her into her arms. The child buried her face against her mother's shoulder, exhausted by the weight of her small but mighty role. The courtroom watched as they walked back to their seats, the image etched into every mind present. The prosecutor returned to his table, his expression calm but triumphant. The defense attorney sat rigid, his pen tapping no more, his smirk long gone. And Officer Daniels. He bowed his head, his chest heaving with the relief of a man who had just watched salvation arrive from the most unlikely of places. That day, truth had not come from experts or rehearsed witnesses. It had come from a child holding a stuffed bunny whose honesty shone brighter than any argument. And though the trial was far from over, everyone in the room understood the tide had turned. The smallest voice had just delivered the loudest blow. The courtroom exhaled as though it had been holding its breath for hours. The little girl had been carried out in her mother's arms, her tiny head resting against her mother's shoulder, her stuffed bunny dangling by one ear. For a brief, tender moment, she looked back over her mother's shoulder, her wide eyes catching sight of the heavy doors where Max the police dog waited with Officer Daniels. She raised a hand and waved. The dog's ears perked. His tail thumped once against the floor, as if he understood. Then she was gone, and with her exit, the weight of her words lingered. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, more a signal to refocus than a call to order. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his tone deliberate, "you will disregard nothing. The testimony you have just heard is admissible, and it is your duty to consider it with the same seriousness as any other." The jurors nodded, their faces grave. Some had tears still glistening in their eyes. At the prosecution's table, Assistant District Attorney Walker sat straighter than he had all trial. His case, once balanced precariously on circumstantial evidence and the credibility of officers, had just been lifted by a voice no one could challenge, a child too innocent to fabricate such clarity. He caught Officer Daniels' gaze across the table. Daniels' eyes were damp, his jaw clenched, but he gave a single resolute nod. The defense attorney, however, looked like a man unraveling thread by thread. He shuffled his papers with unnecessary force, the pages crinkling in his hands. His earlier confidence had melted into agitation. He whispered harshly to his client, the accused man seated beside him, whose face had turned pale at the child's testimony. The accused muttered something back, his fists tightening against his knees, his posture betraying a growing sense of doom. The judge cleared his throat. The prosecution may call its next witness. Walker stood, buttoning his suit jacket, his voice steady and sure. "Your Honor, the people call Officer Michael Daniels." Daniels rose. Every eye followed him as he walked to the stand, the weight of the badge on his chest heavier than usual. He raised his right hand, swore the oath, and took his seat. The prosecutor approached. "Officer Daniels, you were present the night of the incident. Can you tell the court what happened in your own words?" Daniels glanced at the jury, then at the judge. He inhaled deeply, grounding himself. "Yes, sir. That evening, I was dispatched to respond to a domestic disturbance. Upon arrival, I heard yelling inside the residence. When I entered, I observed the defendant, intoxicated, threatening both the mother and the child. He was aggressive. The child was only a few feet away from him. His voice faltered slightly, but he pressed on. My canine partner, Max, was by my side. When the defendant lunged toward the child, Max reacted before I could even give the command. He grabbed hold of the girl's dress, gently but firmly, and pulled her backward toward safety. He placed himself between the child and the defendant. He did not attack. He protected. The jury leaned forward. They had heard the child's 2 words. Now they heard the officer's detailed account, matching perfectly. Did Max injure anyone? The prosecutor asked. Daniels shook his head firmly. No, sir. He never bit the child, never harmed her. His actions were defensive, controlled, and in line with his training. He prevented a tragedy that night. The defense attorney shot to his feet. Objection. This is nothing more than a dramatized story. The officer has a vested interest in defending his dog's reputation. He cannot be objective, but the judge shook his head. Overruled. Continue. Daniel's voice deepened. I've been in law enforcement for 15 years. I've seen officers make mistakes. I've seen canine units fail. But that night, I saw something different. I saw a dog act out of instinct to protect a child. And I will never forget the way she looked at him afterward. Not with fear, but with trust. The courtroom murmured again, the weight of his sincerity undeniable. The prosecutor let the silence sit before asking his final question. Officer Daniels, in your professional judgment, was Max's behavior that night an act of aggression or an act of protection? Daniels didn't hesitate. Protection. Absolutely. Without Max, that child might not be here today. The impact was thunderous. The prosecutor nodded, satisfied. No further questions. The defense attorney rose slowly, his face taut. He paced deliberately, circling Daniels like a hawk. Officer, you claim your dog acted heroically. But isn't it true that police dogs are trained to bite, to attack, to take down suspects with force? Daniels met his gaze evenly. They're trained to protect and to respond to commands, yes. But they're also trained to assess threat levels. Max demonstrated restraint. The defense lawyer sneered. Or perhaps you're painting a picture to save your dog from being put down. Isn't that what this is really about? Your bond with the animal blinding you to the truth? A hush spread. Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced briefly at Max, still waiting beyond the courtroom doors, then back at the lawyer. Sir, this isn't about saving my dog. This is about telling the truth of what happened. I would stake my career, my badge, and my reputation on what I saw. Max saved that little girl. That is the truth. The defense attorney faltered, his voice thinner now. No further questions. Daniel stepped down, returning to his seat with quiet dignity. The prosecutor wasted no time. He called 2 more witnesses. A neighbor who had heard the defendant's shouts and rushed outside, and a paramedic who had treated the mother for bruises that night. Each testimony layered atop the girl's words and Daniel's account, building a wall of truth, brick by brick. The defense tried to poke holes, but every objection rang hollow. Each counterpoint dissolved in the face of consistency. By mid-afternoon, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted entirely. Where once there had been doubt, now there was gravity, a shared understanding that the narrative had tilted. The smallest witness had changed everything, and every testimony afterward seemed to affirm her innocence-born truth. The defendant sat slouched, his face drawn and pale, his bravado gone. His lawyer whispered frantically, but he barely responded, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. And through it all, Max remained outside, silent but powerful in his absence. He didn't need to speak. His actions had already been described in words too pure to dismiss. When court adjourned for the day, the crowd spilled out into the hallway, buzzing with conversation. Reporters swarmed, their microphones flashing, their pens scratching. The story was no longer about a violent outburst, or even about an accused man on trial. It was about a child and a dog, about innocence and loyalty, about truth delivered in its simplest form. Officer Daniels emerged with Max at his side. The dog walked calmly, tail swishing gently, ears alert. The hallway quieted as people noticed him. Some stepped forward hesitantly, reaching to touch his fur, whispering words like good boy and hero. Daniels kept moving, but not before leaning down to rub Max's head. You did it, buddy, he whispered. You really did it. That night, the image of the little girl's words echoed across news channels and headlines. Doggy helped. And though the trial was far from finished, those 2 words had already begun to reshape its outcome. The tide had turned. The truth was marching forward, carried on the smallest shoulders, guarded by 4 paws. The courtroom felt heavier than ever as the trial approached its climax. Every face was tense, every whisper hushed. Even the sunlight streaming through the high windows seemed muted, as if the building itself held its breath. The jury had heard testimony from the 3-year-old, Officer Daniels, neighbors, a paramedic, and even an expert witness, called by the defense. But the final day would be decisive, and both sides knew it. Officer Daniels sat rigidly at the prosecution table, his hands clasped tightly. Max rested quietly beside him outside the courtroom barrier, ears alert, eyes sharp. The dog's calm composure seemed almost prophetic, a silent reminder of the stakes. The prosecutor, confident yet careful, rose to call the next witness, a local child psychologist, Dr. Emily Vargas. She had been asked to provide insight into the toddler's testimony, to explain whether such a young child could reliably recount events from that night. Dr. Vargas took the stand, her presence commanding but warm. "I have studied child development for over 15 years, she said, her voice steady. Children as young as 3 are capable of forming memories and accurately recounting them, especially when the events are emotionally significant. Trauma or danger heightens recall, making certain details more vivid, not less." The courtroom listened intently, some jurors scribbling notes, others nodding thoughtfully. The prosecutor continued. "Dr. Vargas, in your professional opinion, is it likely that a child would fabricate a story about a dog saving her in a threatening situation?" Dr. Vargas shook her head. "It is highly unlikely. Children of that age do not typically construct such narratives. They respond to what they experienced, not to what they think adults want to hear." The gallery seemed to hold its breath. The defense attorney shifted uneasily in his seat, realizing that the child's testimony, which he had hoped to undermine, was now being reinforced by expert opinion. He rose, attempting to counter. "Dr. Vargas, isn't it true that young children can be influenced by suggestion? By what their parents say, by media, or by other adults in the room?" "Yes, under ordinary circumstances," she conceded. But in this case, her responses were spontaneous and consistent. Her account aligns with objective evidence and eyewitness testimony. This was not prompted. It was recalled. The prosecutor allowed a pause, letting the weight of her words sink in. "No further questions, Your Honor." The defense attorney's brow furrowed. He tried one more time, softer now, almost pleading. "And yet, we cannot be entirely certain, can we?" Dr. Vargas looked him directly in the eye. "Absolute certainty is rare in any testimony, regardless of age. But the evidence overwhelmingly supports that this child's account is truthful." Quiet ripple of murmurs ran through the gallery. Even the judge's usually impassive face betrayed a flicker of approval. Next, the prosecution called Officer Daniels back to the stand for closing demonstration. Daniels retrieved a replica of the child's stuffed bunny and a small rope, illustrating how Max had gently restrained the girl without harming her. He mimicked the motion slowly, showing the controlled, precise behavior of Max that night. The jury leaned forward as he explained, step by step, exactly how Max had acted to protect the child. Each movement underscored the training, the restraint, and the instinctive loyalty of the dog. The defense attorney tried again to cast doubt. But isn't it possible the dog could have misjudged the distance? Could he have bitten? Daniels shook his head. Not Max. He's trained to assess threat levels. And as the record shows, Max has never injured a civilian in 6 years of service. At that moment, Max let out a single low bark from beyond the railing. Heads turned. Even the judge's eyes softened. It was as if the dog himself were affirming Daniel's account. The gallery shivered with a mix of awe and emotion. The defense attorney rose for the last time, delivering a measured, solemn appeal to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, we are reminded that dogs are powerful, unpredictable animals. They can act in ways we cannot foresee. The prosecution asks you to rely on the innocence of a child and the assurances of an officer. But we must consider the possibility that actions, however well-intended, could have gone wrong. I ask you to weigh that possibility carefully. Then the prosecutor stood for his closing argument. His voice was calm but compelling. This trial is not about fear or possibility. It is about fact, observation, and the truth. A child's life was at risk. Max acted with precision, loyalty, and courage. He did exactly what he was trained to do. Officer Daniels trusted him. The child trusted him. And the evidence proves that trust was well placed. Justice requires acknowledging the truth, not entertaining hypothetical fears. The jurors listened in silence, the words settling like stones into the foundation of their decision. The judge gave one final instruction. You have heard the evidence. You have considered the arguments. It is now your duty to deliberate and render a verdict based solely on the facts presented. The jury filed out, leaving the courtroom heavy with anticipation. The spectators whispered, glancing at one another, the tension almost unbearable. Officers exchanged quiet words. Reporters huddled, speculating on the outcome. Daniels walked toward the railing, kneeling to scratch Max behind the ears. The dog's calm presence was a comfort in the storm of nerves. Hours passed. The hallways outside the courtroom became crowded with townspeople, all awaiting news. Some paced, some prayed quietly. Others simply sat in tense silence. Each passing minute made the eventual announcement feel more imminent and more monumental. Finally, the jury returned. Their faces were serious, measured, each step deliberate as they approached the judge. The room fell silent again, every eye fixed on the foreperson. Members of the jury, the judge said, have you reached a verdict? The foreperson nodded. We have, Your Honor. The tension was almost unbearable. Every spectator leaned forward. Every pen paused mid-note. Every breath caught in anticipation. We, the jury, the foreperson began, have carefully considered all the evidence presented. We have listened to testimony from the child, the officer, witnesses, and experts. We find that the canine officer, Max, acted in accordance with his training and with the intent to protect. We find no evidence of aggression or misconduct. Max is to remain in service with Officer Daniels. A wave of emotion swept through the room. Daniels felt tears prick his eyes. Max barked once, low and proud, as if acknowledging the verdict himself. The little girl, watching from the gallery with her mother, squealed softly, clutching her bunny, her small hands raised in silent triumph. The courtroom erupted quietly, some clapping, others whispering congratulations. The judge nodded, satisfied. The court thanks the jury for their deliberation. This case is concluded. As Daniels gathered his things and stepped toward Max, reporters shouted questions. He ignored them, kneeling to pet his partner. You did it, buddy, he whispered. You really did it. Max leaned against him, calm and unwavering, the embodiment of loyalty and heroism. Outside, the sun shone brightly over the courthouse steps. Spectators lingered, talking in hushed tones, awed by the story they had witnessed. News crews captured footage of Daniels and Max exiting together, the dog alert, the officer proud, the crowd moved by the bond they shared. It was more than a trial. It was a story of courage, trust, and the extraordinary power of loyalty from a dog, a 3-year-old girl, and the human who had believed in him. The courthouse was quieter than usual that morning. The trial that had consumed the town for weeks had reached its final stage. The gallery was full, but tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Spectators, reporters, officers, and townspeople alike leaned forward, collectively holding their breath as the judge prepared to hear closing arguments. Officer Daniels sat stiffly in his chair, Max resting just beyond the railing, calm but alert, ears pricked as if he could sense the weight of the moment. His partner had been on trial, his honor questioned, and yet here they were, closer than ever to justice. The prosecutor, standing with composed authority, addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, over the course of this trial, you have heard testimony from a child, from an officer, from witnesses on the scene, and even from an expert witness called by the defense. You have heard arguments about possibility, speculation, and doubt. But you have also heard truth. The truth that Max acted to protect, that a child was saved, and that no harm was done to the innocent. This is not speculation. This is not fantasy. This is fact. The gallery nodded quietly, some eyes glistening with emotion. The defense attorney rose slowly, his steps measured, his voice trembling slightly as he addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you have seen a dog, yes. You have heard a child's account, and you have listened to an officer's testimony. But let us not forget the importance of caution. Police dogs are powerful animals trained to bite and subdue. While we hope they act correctly, accidents happen. It is your duty to consider whether this dog could have acted dangerously, even if he did not. The stakes are high. And while we respect the work of officers in K9 South, the law must prevail. Justice must be fair and impartial. His words were carefully constructed, but they lacked the emotional weight that had carried the prosecution's case. The spectators murmured quietly, their sympathy leaning heavily toward Max and Daniels. The judge's gavel struck, signaling the end of arguments. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard all testimony. It is now your duty to deliberate and render a verdict based on the evidence presented. You may retire to the jury room. The jury filed out, their faces serious, their minds heavy. The room fell into tense silence, each observer acutely aware that the outcome would determine not just the future of Max, but the lives of all those involved. Outside the courtroom, reporters crowded together, microphones extended, cameras flashing, but Daniels remained focused on Max. He knelt briefly, rubbing the dog's ears, whispering, "Whatever happens, buddy, you did the right thing." Max nudged his hand with his nose, calm and steadfast. Hours passed. The murmurs in the hallway grew restless. Spectators shifted, fidgeted, whispered predictions. Finally, the jury filed back into the courtroom, their faces unreadable. The judge called the room to order. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict? The foreperson stood, a tall woman with steady hands and a solemn expression. We have, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Please present your verdict. A hush fell over the courtroom, so complete that a pin drop would have echoed. We, the jury, the foreperson began, find in favor of the defendant. The K9 officer, Max, acted in accordance with his training and with protection as his intent. We find no evidence of aggression or unlawful behavior. The dog is to remain in service with Officer Daniels. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room. Some spectators clapped softly. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Daniels felt his knees weaken slightly, his chest heaving as he tried to keep his emotions in check. Max barked once, low and proud, as if acknowledging the victory himself. The defense attorney's face fell. He muttered something under his breath. The fight gone from him. The accused man slumped in his seat, staring blankly, defeated, a shadow of indignation lingering on his face. The judge's voice broke through the moment. The court thanks the jury for their careful deliberation. This case is concluded. Daniel stood, motioning to Max, who trotted beside him. Together they exited the courtroom, the weight of the trial lifting with each step. Outside, the sun shone brightly, catching the sheen of Max's coat and warming the air with the promise of freedom and vindication. Reporters shouted questions, eager for quotes, but Daniels only smiled faintly and said, "Max did his job. That's all that matters." He lifted the leash, letting Max lead the way down the courthouse steps. The crowd parted respectfully, some clapping, some snapping photographs, all witness to a rare moment where truth, loyalty, and bravery had triumphed. That evening, the little girl who had unwittingly changed the course of the trial sat at home with her mother, retelling the story in her own words. Doggy helped me," she declared repeatedly, her eyes shining. Her mother smiled, tears of gratitude glistening. "Yes, baby, he did. He really did." Word of the verdict spread quickly through the town, carried by news outlets and social media. Headlines celebrated Max as a hero, the toddler as a voice of truth, and Officer Daniels as a man whose faith in his partner had never wavered. Children in neighborhoods waved at police dogs in admiration, inspired by a story that combined courage, innocence, and loyalty. In the following weeks, Max returned to active duty, his presence more respected than ever. Officer Daniels watched him closely during patrols, not just as a handler, but as a partner whose bond had been tested in a way few could understand. Max responded with unwavering discipline, patient and alert, his loyalty deepened by the trial and the recognition he had earned. The town, too, changed in small ways. Parents spoke to their children about honesty, courage, and standing by those who do right. Officers shared stories of Max with new recruits, emphasizing the importance of training, trust, and the silent heroism that animals can provide. And the little girl? She remained a quiet but radiant presence in the community, her words remembered as the ones that had saved a dog's life and cemented a story that would be told for generations. One evening, Daniel sat on the porch of his home, Max lying at his feet. The dog lifted his head, ears twitching, sensing his handler's reflection on the days that had passed. Daniels reached down, stroking Max's sleek coat. "You were amazing, buddy. Everyone knows it now." Max nuzzled his hand, calm and steadfast. In that simple, wordless exchange, they reaffirmed a bond that had carried them through danger, trial, and triumph. In the end, the case was more than a trial. It was a testament to loyalty, courage, and the profound impact of innocence. It reminded a town that truth can come in unexpected forms, from a 3-year-old, from a dog, and from those who refuse to let injustice prevail. As the sun set over the courthouse steps, the streets glowed with a golden light, a silent celebration for a dog who had truly helped, a child who had spoken the truth, and a community reminded of the power of honesty and courage. Max remained at Daniel's side, ready for whatever the next day would bring. A hero not just in service, but in the hearts of all who witnessed the story unfold. And though the trial was over, the story of loyalty, bravery, and the smallest voice making the largest impact would echo for years to come.